Pixar's film slate has been a bit of a mixed bag as of late. Despite that, and during what feels like a bit of a low point in Pixar's overall stellar career, there's been a massive recent resurgence of The Incredibles. Since I keep seeing these seemingly endless amounts of YouTube shorts and feature length essays on hidden lore and background characters, I thought it was about time we revisited The Incredibles and everything surrounding it. The first film very well may be my favourite Pixar movie. I say mixed bag before because I quite enjoy Soul and Turning Red, but I've completely forgotten what happens in Onwards, and I don't really feel particularly inclined to go watch Elio or Elemental, though if you think they're worth a watch, maybe let me know. The Incredibles is this seamless blending of Pixar whimsy, family life, 1960s era superheroing, along with the crushing reality of corporate American life at the time. What sets The Incredibles apart from even some of the best Pixar has to offer, at least as far as I see it, is the writer-director Brad Bird's approach to character-driven storytelling. As much as we have the spectacle of a superhero film, the really engaging through-line of the movie, all the action set pieces and gags aside, is the bonds between the characters as a family. I find it incredibly interesting that there's been such an Incredibles resurgence right around the time of the recent release of the new Fantastic Four film, since The Incredibles is kind of just the best version of the Fantastic Four without remotely being a Fantastic Four film. Like the Fantastic Four were Marvel's first family, The Incredibles sort of feel the same way for Pixar. Especially with the new Fantastic Four film having that retro futuristic aesthetic, The Incredibles really is the perfect Fantastic Four film. I am personally of the belief, and by no means feel I'm alone in this, that superhero films aren't a genre in themselves. They're more so a framework or backdrop for whatever kind of storytelling you'd like. Unfortunately, superhero films that set themselves apart with a more defined genre are movies like The New Mutants and The Joker, both being psychological thrillers that still occupy that superhero framework. I say unfortunately because New Mutants was horrible and I've only seen one of the two Joker films, but that seems to be in a critical downward spiral. I say superhero is not inherently a genre, but probably more than that, and particularly relevant to The Incredibles, animation isn't a genre and it isn't inherently for kids. Animation is a medium, and approaching an animated film as a genre leads to cookie cutter films that continue the cycle of people considering it a genre for kids. Narrowing it a little bit on the film now. When approaching The Incredibles, Brad Bird didn't write an animated story. He wrote a story that just so happens to be told through animation. That's why it doesn't feel like a kids' movie, but it still works for kids. The story, as fantastical as it is in moments and action set pieces, is almost aggressively grounded. Steering clear of just going beat for beat, let's do a little overview of the first Incredibles film before we get too far into it. Following the events of the film's cold open, superheroes, were forced to retire following the government passing a bill functionally banning them, all of them relocating to live new normal lives in a bit of a witness protection sort of way. With the film following Bob, Mr. Incredible, and Helen, Mrs. Incredible or Elastigirl, along with their three kids in Dash, Violet, and Jack Jack. Bob's now working in the exciting world of insurance, longing to return to superhero life while gently scratching their itch by illegally sneaking out and fighting petty crimes with his mate Frozone. Following that, Bob gets offered a job doing some superhero work and jumps at the opportunity. Turns out that job was offered to him by Syndrome, current villain and former wannabe sidekick of Bob's. We'll get into that later, but his whole goal is to level the playing field, making everyone on par with supers. Helen working out what Bob's up to, and her along with incidentally Dash and Violet head to save him. There's also their baby Jack Jack at home who, after presumably being powerless the whole film, turns out to have all sorts of powers in the film's finale. I always interpreted that as a kid that he just had all the powers, but he just has a bunch. Everyone teams up to defeat Syndrome's big Omnidroid before it can destroy the city, and Jack Jack ends up sending Syndrome through a plane engine. There's also the tease of the villain the Underminer, a very mole man stand-in, who'd be seen 14 years later in the second film, where they pick up right where they left off. So now that we've gotten the general premise out of the way and really skimming over some plot details there, something that probably doesn't get spoken about enough is the visuals. 2004 technological restrictions aside, the movie looks great, or at least the visuals fulfill a purpose. Everything surrounding superheroics is bold with these reds, blacks and golds, super strong punchy colours, while the world surrounding them, and even them when they're not actively being heroes, is rather dull. More colder, washed out blues and greys. It's just so effective, particularly in Bob's office. There's also something there with Syndrome's lack of colour, but in a very different way. Bob and the rest of the family have more plain looks when they're in their civilian clothes, who dress up in these bombastic red suits, while Syndrome has the more intense, bombastic, colourful hair, but wears black and white. The film is also so surprisingly quite thematically dark. The dreariness of the office aside, there's a point in the first film where Mr. Incredible is under the impression his whole family's died. That and all the violence against literal children in this film. I'm straying away from going beat for beat on the plot of each film since if you're watching this, I imagine you're reasonably familiar, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of the series. Talking more broadly about the world, The Incredibles uses superpowered individuals to tell a really suburban, semi-down-to-earth midlife crisis story of a family man trying to relive his glory days. Mr. Incredible spends most of the film trying to, I don't want to say regress, but functionally go back to a version of himself that he deems as better, even if it might not really have been better. He's giving off the person who peaked in high school and then went dramatically downhill from there. Whereas Helen, Mrs. Incredible or Elastigirl's arc, follows her as the sole caretaker and mum for most of the film. Very much following the traditional gender roles, only to have that swapped about in the following film. In the first movie, we see the same family life Bob's struggling with take its toll on her as well. Both of them as a unit are stretched thin, trying to manage what is, in Bob's eyes, a very mediocre life. With Helen being willing to put her dreams aside to put her family first, while as Bob very much does the opposite. All this being said, in Incredibles 2, the dynamic is flipped with Helen becoming the breadwinner and being able to pursue her career as a superhero, leaving Bob to be the homekeeper, slowly adapting to it despite his discomfort and his initial jealousy that Helen's back to being Elastigirl. Getting into the younger members of the household with Dash and Violet, and taking a moment to appreciate that I'm getting old, I remember seeing this in the theatres in 2004, with Dash sort of being my point of view character at the time. Certainly not a particularly relatable character for me, but far more than the adults, who at the time I couldn't begin to relate to in the same way. Now watching it in current year, I'm finding the struggles of the adult life and having to do the mundane, somewhat life-draining bits and pieces, like what feels like a never-ending work week, the endless little responsibilities that pile up with adult life, and I don't even have children or super strength. The Incredibles is at times bombastic, dreary, but a beautiful telling of a very grounded human story. Back to the kids. Dash is this loud, bashful kid with endless energy, very much not how I was, but a pretty standard hyperactive kid altogether. His super speed being especially complimentary for that personality type, whereas Violet, the quiet, practically invisible, shy character, quite literally is invisible. I'm sure there's a metaphor there for force fields and putting up emotional walls in there somewhere. I apologise, I'm sure this video is totally incoherent and structureless, but circling back to the parents, each family member and Frozen's powers are so indicative of who they are as people. Like I said, speed for the super active energetic younger boy, invisibility for the shy teenager, super strength for the dad that carries a lot of weight on his shoulders, and the ability to stretch for a mum at her limits, but just keep stretching herself thinner and thinner. I'm not exactly breaking ground by analysing what their powers represent, but worth mentioning anyway. Now getting into our fanboy turned tech bro, before that term was even really a thing, with Syndrome. The former number one Mr. Incredible enjoyer spirals into an obsessive villain focused on bringing his former idol down by raising everyone else up but him. And then following all of this, and we've gotten into it a bit, the sequel flips family dynamics on their heads, with Helen going off being the hero while Bob's manning the house. Only this time it's a much nicer home. The sequel certainly feels a lot lighter than the original. There's dark subject matters, but the emotional stakes within the family just aren't there in the same way. And I, for the most part, really enjoyed Screenslaver as a villain. They're largely there for the sake of a plot twist with their identity reveal, more than they are a fleshed out character like Syndrome. The Incredibles 2 really does double down on the action without delivering the same character conflict. Saying that, I really do enjoy the character interactions in this film quite a lot, especially Bob's home life and Helen's superheroing. And just to slot this in here, doesn't really hold as much weight in either film, but Frozen was always my favourite character. The scene with him and Bob being discovered, with him reaching for water, was a real highlight for me, second only to the scene where Bob discovers the records of all the deceased heroes. And before we wrap things up, it feels only right that we discuss the most memorable part about The Incredibles 2004 release, for me at least, and that's the tie-in McDonald's Happy Meal toy. Growing up, we got McDonald's maybe once or twice a year, usually if we were going on a road trip or if we were homesick and Mum felt particularly sorry for us that day. I must have been sick that day because in 2004, Mum came home with an Incredibles toy. Looking at them now, they're a pretty mixed bag. It's a little odd just how they scaled these. Jack Jack's head's about the size of Bob's body, while Syndrome is about the size of one of his arms, and Violet is taller but probably about a third of the size of Dash. It has been a fair while, but I remember seeing this Dash in the, what I'm going to say is a ring of water that he's running across, and being so excited about it. And tell me if I'm wrong, I could be misremembering this, but I reckon it worked like one of those cars where you drag it back a few times and it takes off.
Onto this track, and there's a little wind-up gimmick here, and inside the wheel spins and it catches these teeth right here. So all you want to do is just wind this guy up, just like so, and wound up nice and good, and let him go.
What I'm trying to say is The Incredibles isn't just a good Pixar film or animated film or even really a superhero film, it's just a great film. It seamlessly blends grounded family drama with fantastical superhero elements. It's not for kids, but I doubt you could find someone, child or otherwise, who didn't enjoy this film. That being said, I feel quite a lot of nostalgia for this film series, so let me know if I'm just looking at it with rose-tinted glasses. If you've made it this far into the video and aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. Either way, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching.